Parashas Ki-Tetze has many mitzvahs. In fact, it could be the parasha with the most mitzvahs in the Torah, even more than Mishpatim. So we have a lot of choices to speak about. We'll begin with the mitzvah of Makeh. Makeh, the Torah tells us in Chaf Beis Ches, it's Basisa Makeh L'kanecha L'sasim Dama V'Eisecha. So the Torah tells us a mitzvah of Makeh. We'll get into the details about let's say you have a roof, and during those days, flat roof. Also, there are some flat roofs around that are not recommended because of flooding and the water getting in. In a warm climate, they say, people thought flat roofs were the best, but yeah, in the warm climate they're good, but in a cold climate, I found out the hard way, they're not the best. They leak in, and I put a slant on mine. But either way, it was a case where people walking on a place, that's the classical place, and therefore it's dangerous up there, don't look down, and therefore there's a mitzvah to put a fence around to surround it for protection. So there's a big discussion regarding the mitzvah of Makeh, whether one makes a bracha, because we know, as the Gemara tells us in Psachim, and the Rambam as well in Hilchos Brachas, that usually we make a bracha over L'asiyasan. Before we do a mitzvah, we make a bracha. So the question is, we don't find anywhere explicit in the Gemara or in the Shulchan Aruch, Shetzarach Levarach. We don't find anywhere explicitly written that one is obligated to make a blessing on the mitzvah of Makeh. And in fact, I'll read you the Lashon HaRambam. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Brachas, Osa Makeh Mevarech Asiya Asher Kedeshadam B'Tzavos Lasos Makeh. So the Rambam writes, you do make a bracha when putting up a Makeh. V'chein Kasav B'Sefer Hilchos Gedolos. In the Sefer Hilchos Gedolos, in Hilchos Mezuzah, as well as the Shiltas to Rav Achai go in Parashas Ekev, and the Or Zarua, and the Stei Chemed, who's an encyclopedia, basically like an encyclopedia, he quotes all the different shitas. He writes, B'divrei rov haposkim, mashma she'chiyav levarach. So he writes, according to the most poskim, that one has an obligation when they put the fence around the roof, or perhaps today a fence around the pool. You know, according to many, it also would require, could be a Makeh, could not be, but the Rov HaPoskim write, when you're fulfilling the mitzvah of Makeh, one should make a bracha. However, the Rokeach, one of the earlier commentators, he disagrees. He writes, De'ein mevarchin al asiyas Makeh. He says not to. The simple pshat is we make a bracha. Why not? Normally, before we do a mitzvah, we make a bracha. And sometimes we make a bracha in the middle, sometimes afterwards. As we pointed out, look, there's only two brachas min ha-Torah, two brachas in the Torah. So that happens. Birkas ha-Torah we explain we make before we learn Torah, and Birkas ha-Mazon we make after we eat. And as we discussed, the Sefer Achinach Meshachach, with this simple pshat, without any of the Mefarshim, you could say, because Birkas HaTorah could be maybe as a Birkas HaMitzvah. So before you learn Torah, before you do the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, you make a bracha. And Birkas HaMazon is like a Birkas Shevach V'Hodah. It's a bracha of thanksgiving, of praise, and therefore you make it after you experience the food or whatever we're talking about, so you make a bracha. So, but mitzvahs, but 98% of the brachas are rabbinical, so we find brachas sometimes before, in the middle, or after. So one would think Pashas Makeh should be a mitzvah, and therefore, like Rov HaPoskim, we make a bracha. So what is the Rokeach? Why does the Rokeach say not to make a bracha? Why should Makeh be different than other mitzvahs in the Torah that we make a bracha? what's the size? So the Rokeach writes, the ein mevarchim al asiyas maka v'zel shono. Kol davar shemrei Noach huzul, of any mitzvah or anything that a non-Jew as well keeps. It's not exclusive to the Jewish people, but it applies to anybody. Kagon, Gezel, Chama, Tzedakah. Well, let's say, it's a negative, but let's say Tzedakah. In fact, Ein Tzarech Levarach. There's a famous question among the Rishonim and Achronim. Tzedakah, last week's Parshas Ekev, is, or some might say it's 2 weeks ago if we're reading Ki-Tetze, but it's in Parshas Ekev, or actually Re'eh. I mean, it talks about Asir Ta'asir. So, the mitzvah of giving tzedakah and meiser. So, it's a mitzvah in our Torah of meiser, of tzedakah. So how come we don't make a bracha? So there's a famous answer of the Tshuvas Harashba. The Tshuvas Harashba writes, you know why you don't make a bracha, a blessing before you give charity? Because any mitzvah that's dependent on someone else, so therefore you don't make a bracha. Go, why? What's the concern? The poor person might not take it. What do you mean a poor person might not take it? You know any aniyim who don't take it? Well, I'm not sure if they're aniyim or not, but they come to the door and they say, what? Are you kidding me? $10? I'm not taking that. They'll throw it back at you. They want 100, 200. So the concern is you'll make a bracha and then they won't take the money, and therefore it will be a bracha levatala. It will be a blessing in vain. Because since the mitzvah of tzedakah is result oriented, as the Chazal tell us, if I drop, or if anyone else for that matter, drop a $20 bill or a $10 bill out of my pocket, I lose it, and a poor person, an ani, picks it up, I get the mitzvah of tzedakah. Because tzedakah is result oriented, whereas we'll see chesed on the other hand, chesed more is to elevate the giver, like the famous Gemara in Sukkah. The Gemara says that Gedola Gemilas Chasadim, that Gemilas Chasadim is greater than tzedakah. And that what I mean, it's greater, that it applies in more areas, because tzedakah only can be given to the poor, but chesed can be done to the rich and the poor. Tzedakah can only be given to the living. Chesed can be done to the living and the dead. The ultimate chesed shalemes, the kvura. And tzedakah only with money, chesed also with bodily exertion. So besides the quantitative difference that is much more broad, the Maharal explains, but there's a more fundamental difference. That by tzedakah, what do I give tzedakah? What is the person usually? You're walking down the street, a beggar comes to you, and you're a nice person, to give the person tzedakah. Or maybe you get a phone call, maybe you get a knock on the door, maybe you get an email, maybe you get a letter, however you get it, but there's an external factor. Okay, I wasn't necessarily thinking giving tzedakah, someone comes by, okay, so it's a good thing, you give tzedakah. But chesed stems from you. I have a desire, I have to do good. And who I do the good to really doesn't make a difference. How do I know that? The classical Ish HaChesed is Avram Avinu. And how did Avraham, what's the classical case of Avraham? In the beginning of Parshas Vayera, when he's recovering from his major surgery, of course, as we all know the difference between major surgery and minor surgery, when it's happening to you, it's minor. When it's happening to me, it's major. But clearly a 99-year-old man having a circumcision is major surgery, and he's recovering from the surgery, so God makes it very hot so no one should come by. But God sees that Avram's having more pain, more distress, more sorrow. No one's coming to visit him. He can't do chesed. Then the fact from the heat of the sun. So God sends these 3 angels dressed up as people, and he goes ahead and he has a rib fest. He gets all the meat working, the beef tenderloin, the ribs, the steak, the French fries, the potatoes, the works. So why is he getting all this food ready? Angels don't eat. It's not about the angels. It's about Abraham. When you do chesed, it's to elevate you. Abraham had to do a chesed, so God gave him some person to do it on, in this case some angel. But tzedakah is result-oriented, and therefore if the ani doesn't get the tzedakah, you don't get the mitzvah. For instance, if you put money in the pushka, that's not a mitzvah. If it gets to the charity of choice, then you get the mitzvah. But in terms of that's a discussion. At what point could you still take it back or not? There's issues of reneging on the pledges. That's a separate discussion. But the famous reason of the Rashba, why don't you make a bracha? Because it's dependent on someone else. In fact, that's the famous Ravid. There's a discussion among the Rishonim, the Rambam and the Rush, on the mitzvah of marriage. I should say, if there is a mitzvah of marriage. The Rambam says yes, and those who say there's no mitzvah of marriage, I don't mean it's one of the modern thinkers of today who says marriage isn't a good thing, but marriage isn't a mitzvah. The mitzvah is having children, and to have children, it's recommended to do it in the context of marriage. But so the Rambam holds Kiddushin itself as a mitzvah. The Rush says no, there's no mitzvah of Kiddushin. Pru Ravu, having the children, that's the mitzvah. So therefore, the bracha the rabbi makes under the chuppah, under the canopy, according to the Rush, is a bercha shevach v'hodah. It's a blessing of praise and thanksgiving on the institution of marriage, and therefore it can be done anytime. The Rambam's opinion is it's a berchas ha-mitzvah, and first you make the bracha, and then you do the kiddushin. The Ravid agrees with the Rambam that it's a berchas ha-mitzvah, yet he says you don't make the bracha until after the wedding, after the kiddushin. I understand the Rambam, it's a berchas ha-mitzvah, you make it before the Rush, you can make it after, but according to the Ravid, if there's a mitzvah of kiddushin, how come I don't make the bracha until after? So the Ravid has the same klal, because since it's dependent on someone else, the wife or the would-be wife might say, no, I changed my mind, I don't want to marry you, and then you'll make a bracha levatola. So therefore, the Ravid says, make sure that you do the kiddushin first, and then make. That's not. We passing like the Rambam. That at that point we're assuming we went through that stage already, and they're going to go through with it already. But we make the bracha. But again, the same concept. You don't make a bracha if it's dependent on someone else. I saw an interesting pshat. There was a discussion among the Machronim on the man. We all know the man. The 40 years the Jews ate in Mitzrayim. They ate in the Midbar. They ate in Mitzrayim also. In fact, some ate so well they wanted to go back. They weren't happy with the man. They wanted the food in Mitzrayim. And I thought the man tasted like whatever you wanted it to taste like. So what did So they say if you complain about the man, you'll complain about anything. If it's sunny out, people complain it's too hot. If it's raining, so you have some people who are going to complain no matter what. That's the cloud there. But the man fell in the Midbar. So did the Jews make a blessing before they ate the man? So that's a discussion. Did they make a bracha? Is it appropriate to make hamotzi lechem min haaretz? The Rama Mipadu says you make hamotzi lechem min hashamayim. He says at the Sudas HaMashiach. I don't mean at the end of Yontif. I mean when the Mashiach comes and you're going to have the Lev certain food you're going to be eating at the Sudas HaMashiach. So he says, you're going to eat the man, we're going to have some man, and the Ramah says you're going to make a bracha, hamotzi lechem min hashamayim. Others say, based on a Seforno, no, you can make hamotzi lechem min haaretz, because you know why? Because the Seforno writes, if you separated the man on Shabbos, I guess somehow it was left over because it didn't fall, you violate the biblical prohibition of kotzer, of cutting. So according to Seforno, somehow it's true it came from Shamayim, but it went into the ground and it got its nourishment in the ground. So therefore, it's enough to say hamotzi lechem min haaretz, because it is like the Chai Adam raises a very practical question today of hydroponics. what bracha do you make on a vegetable? And it wasn't during the Ki-Tetze time. It wasn't like it is today, where you have what bracha do you make on something that doesn't grow in the ground? So that's the whole discussion. And what's considered rov? Do you go by rov or not? So we have the Aruch HaShulchan discusses, and others discuss the bracha on mushrooms. The Gemara says you make a shahako. Even though they come out of the ground, but our rabbis tell us they get the nourishment from the air around it, the fungi, whatever they are. But we don't make a boer pri adama. So, but the Aruch HaShulchan writes, b'diavad, if one made a boer pri adama, you yotze, because since it grows in the ground. So similarly, maybe by hydroponics as well, some posts can make a difference. Some grow in the ground, but they're not getting the nourishment. Others, so then there's more of a reason. Some say if you're growing it in your office, in your pot in your office, some say you make a shakos. That's a discussion today among the postim, and today it's very prevalent, hydroponics. So the Chayyim raises that question there by the when they discuss what bracha. He discussed in the context of what bracha do you make hamotzi lechem in arts, and you get into the issue of perhaps birkas hamazon as well. But they point out so some say you say hamotzi lechem in haaretz, some say you have hamotzi lechem in hashamayim. Others say that.
Was look at the nanny in the desert?
No, right. So some say there was no bracha because some say because Moshe Rabbeinu has done a sakol. It makes sense that the Jews. So some say like in the Tziv that since it was a supernatural occurrence, we only make brachas on derech hateva. That since it was miraculous, that's why is birkas hamazon given now? The Jews didn't bench in the midbar because that was given for the dor hanichnas the Eretz Yisrael, and of course, and after that, but not before, because when you're going to start working for a living, planting in the ground, when you do things derech hateva in a normative way, then you make a bracha. But you don't make brachas on miracles. That's why birkas Torah as well isn't given until Hazinu or Vayelach, whichever parish, all the way at the end. Kishem Hashem Ekra. Because they were learning, but there was no birkas Torah, so some say there was no bracha. Even though logically it makes sense to thank God anyway, but the logic was, you had nisim nefus. That's a discussion. So the Rav Yosef angle in the Gilyonei Hashas, he just says maybe it depends on the question of whether if the mun, what we say, the mun tasted like anything you wanted. Did it only taste like anything you wanted, or did it actually become what you wanted? So in other words, I wanted a nice fresh piece of bread. Did it become bread, or it just tasted like bread? So he says, if you hold tamo mamasho, then you could talk about hamotzi lechem in oretz if you're making bread. So my nafkamina tamo mamasho. I'll tell you a nafkamina. I'm in the mood for a cheeseburger. So if it just tasted like a cheeseburger, why not? But if it became a cheeseburger, I have a problem. What about having my ice cream right after my steak, like in Holland, after the weddings? Again, so it depends on or could I on Shabbos, could I think of cooking the food, whatever it was. So some point out, very interesting, along these lines we were saying by tzedakah, by the bracha, some say, because of this reason, you can't make a bracha on the mun. You know why you can't make a bracha on the mun? Because let's say, okay, you know what? I want an apple now. Okay. Bore priya eitz, and before you eat it, you think, I really want a steak. And it turns into a steak, so it'll be a bracha l'vatala. So some say, since you can't control your machshava, so you can't control your thoughts, so therefore you don't make a bracha, because since it depends on what you're thinking, it's constantly changing. So that's an extension. That's even though it's something dependent on you, but since even though lo sachmo lo sasava, but this is an involuntary reaction. You can't control yourself. You see you walk by, you see me barbecuing. Of course, you're going to want meat, and therefore you have to be careful. So some say bracha l'vatala. But getting back to tzedakah, so what the Rokeach said anyway was, you know why you don't make a bracha on makeh? Because it's like tzedakah. That what? It's something that it's not exclusive to the Jewish people. That you can't say asher kiddishano b'mitzvosa v'tzivano when we do a mitzvah, we show the uniqueness of the Jewish people, and therefore we go ahead and we want to make the bracha. So therefore, but we can't say by tzedakah or makeh asher Ki-Tetze, because everyone puts fences around their roof, everyone blocks their pools because it's seichel. And in fact, that's another reason other posts can bring down that the reason why you don't make a bracha on makeh or tzedakah or appointing a king, because it's a mitzvah sichlis. Anytime you have a mitzvah that makes sense on your own, it's something that we could figure out. We don't need God to tell us. It's a mitzvah sichlis, and that's why they discuss in terms of what do you mean? Is a guy chayiv in tzedakah? Is a non-Jew obligated in the mitzvah of tzedakah? Because on one hand, it's not one of the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. So normally we assume a non-Jew is only obligated. Doesn't mean he can't do it, but he's not obligated in the 7. He's only obligated in the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. What are the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach? The way I remember them, everyone could have their own code, but I say the big 3. The 3 things you have to give up your life for, even a Jew: illicit relations, arayis; avodah zara, idol worship; ritzicha, murder. Then I go with Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Daled. Aleph is Aver Menachai, ripping a limb of a live animal. Beis is a euphemism, Birkas Hashem, blessing God, but it means cursing God. Gimel, Gezo, a whole discussion, Ramban, what Gezo, and also Dinim, and Daled is setting up a court system. So I didn't see the mitzvah of tzedakah in this. So some want to say maybe it's part of Dinim and other things, but others point out that the Ran writes that a guy is chayiv in mitzvah sichlis. Besides the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach, if it's something which is logical, again, people could discuss what's but because even though tzedakah is different for Jew, there's the logic of tzedakah, but then we have specific things. Getting married is logical, but when we make a bracha on kiddushin, we're showing how, in fact, that's why we don't have the normal bracha on mitzvahs kiddushin. That's what the Rush points out. We go through a special girsa, al-isr, al-arayis, because we want to show it's not just the classical bracha in the mitzvah. So that's what some point out here. The reason why there's no bracha on makeh is because it's a mitzvah sichos. So we had the rokeach that is, if non-Jews do it, so you can't say it. And similarly, mitzvah sichos. And I'll give you one more. I'll give you a reason why is another klal. I'll quote you the Rambam in Hilchos Brachas by Mayim Achronim. Well, actually, we wash our hands 3 different times during a meal. We're all familiar with Mayim Rishonim. That's before we touch bread and eat the bread, we wash our hands. That we make a bracha on. Then there's Mayim Achronim, the bracha, not the bracha, we wash hands, and there's a machlokas whether some even say you make a bracha on that. We paskin no. We wash our hands without a bracha. And then there's Mayim Emsaim, middle waters. What are middle waters? I heard of beginning waters and end waters. What are middle waters? The Tosis and the Rush right in Chulin, it's talking about washing your hands. Let's say it doesn't have to be Shavuos, but Shavuos is a likely scenario, because some have a minute to have dairy first and then have meat in the same meal. So therefore what you do is you do Mayim Emsam. You have to make sure you wash your hands to make sure you get all the cheese and milk off your hands. So there's no bracha of Mayim Emsam. Everyone agrees there's no bracha, because anytime you're doing something to avoid an Aveira, you don't make a bracha. You don't make a bracha if you're doing something to avoid. You only make a bracha when you're doing a mitzvah. So for instance, an onain, someone between the death and the burial, of course I don't mean the person who's dead, Mesim chafshi min ha-mitzvahs. There's relatives who have to take care of the burial. They are exempt from mitzvahs. Not only exempt, but they can't do. In fact, it's rare that a rabbi gets to tell someone not to come to shul. And in fact, I had a scenario the other day where someone who was an onain, he didn't know he came to shul. and I told him to go home, that he shouldn't be davening and he shouldn't be, I said, focus on the rest of the year. That was the irony is, I don't see those people the rest of the year, but an onin is usher. We pass it's usher to make brachas and do those things. I told him he could go and do things that to be involved with the mace. But an onin, so what about it? Let's say it's sukkah. So what does an onin do? So he sits in the sukkah without a bracha. Why? Because according to some, there might be an isser to eat chutz sukkah. So he's only eating in the sukkah to avoid the prohibition, but he's exempt from the mitzvah. So anytime you do something to avoid an aveira, you don't make a bracha. So therefore, so too here, if there's a lo sasim dabim v'veisecha, some say in fact the reason why you don't make a bracha because it's a lav. It's a question whether it's an asay and a lav, so it's a question whether it's an asay mechazik the lav or the lavs. There's a discussion on that. But some say because since you're avoiding an isser to do it, there's no asay, but if you don't do, you're violating a lav, so therefore you don't make a bracha. But others point out as well, so along the lines, you don't make a bracha on something which is for sakana. So since the Torah tells us, one of the reasons to put a fence is because someone shouldn't fall off. Like the Rambam writes, Mayim achronim ein mevarchem aleim she'einam ela b'mnei sakana. The Rambam writes the reason why we don't make a bracha on the water on washing your hands at the end of the meal is because we do it because there was a melech, there's the salt from Sodom around, but it's around today is a separate discussion. And therefore the concern was you can have the salt and put it in your eyes and get blind. So therefore, since we're only washing our hands at the end of the meal to avoid the danger, so therefore you don't make a bracha. So let's summarize. So we discussed the mitzvah of makeh, one of the many mitzvahs in this week's parsha. The consensus view is that we do make a bracha, and the Rambam writes to make the bracha lasos makeh. And however, the dissenting view, the Rokeach and others, we gave different reasons why you wouldn't make a bracha. Either because it's something that everyone does, it's not exclusive to the Jewish people, or because also as well it's a mitzvah sichlis, it's something which is logical and therefore we don't make a bracha as well because non-Jews do that as well. Or we discussed you don't do something to avoid an aveira, and therefore if it's a negative commandment that you can't put people in danger, so therefore you have to do it to avoid an aveira. Or similar lines, you don't make a bracha because you don't make a bracha when you do something to avoid a danger, sakana, like the Rambam writes by Mayim Achronim.